Hello and welcome to the Practical Leadership Podcast, where leaders share their tools, practical advice to make you a better leader today. Today, my guest is a co-president at Documation, a fast-growing IT, print, and software solution company. He was recently awarded a 40 under 40 recognition for his talents by the Business Journal. He sits on the board of the Texas Research and Technology Foundation. There's a lot to talk about that. And within that, they have the community house where they give owners an opportunity to exit their business, but keeping ownership local. One of the subjects that I know we are all going to be curious about. One of the things that is most dear to my heart is one thing that he's been able to accomplish, which is he has led his organization to be recognized as the best place to work. You will see it throughout our conversation today, the passion for people. He's creative, he is passionate, he's driven. Preston Woolfolk, great to have you here today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Max. I appreciate it.
So before we get started, what is something good, positive, fun that's been happening in your world over the last few months?
Oh, goodness, man. Probably the big one you kind of highlighted in when you did your intro was Documation winning the best places to work in the state of Texas. So that was probably one of the biggest great things that's been going on for us. We won number 3 in the state. That was pretty exciting. Obviously, our employees are the ones that vote on this. We promised, we didn't bribe them. I didn't give them an ice cream party or anything on that end. We just sent them the link. And across the state of Texas, all of our locations, they voted us number 3 in the state of Texas. So that was probably the highlight reel of the year, right? Over the last few months. And on top of that, with the business was the last closeout for 2022. We had some astronomical growth, 25% organic growth for our company, non-acquisition, just normal day-to-day down the street business, working with our clients and working through our teams executing. So those would probably be the big highlight reels from the business side.
It's how amazing, right? Like I always like to talk about, we've got to be a purpose-driven, people-caring organization that is also accountable and result-oriented. And you're like giving me those two, right? Like our people are happy and thriving, and we're really killing it in terms of outcomes. Let's start with the people side of things. So where do you think that, care for people comes from? That attention to their experience, their growth, their success comes from, right? Because that's the only way that you actually end up with the best place to work award. Tell me a little bit about that.
I think it's going to sound a little cheesy, but I think it's good old fashioned values, right? If you look at, really the rise of the employer, what we call maybe corporate companies, this is a industrial revolution thing onwards. This idea of a business and being an employer is not something that really ever happened in the world for the first, 4,000 years of humanity. It's in the last 150, maximum of 200 years that this really popped up. Right. And I think what you really saw back then, you had a lot of apprentice type work. People kind of did their own trade. And then you have these employers pop up with the Industrial Revolution. And it's fascinating what happened. They housed people. Right? People need good living conditions. These businesses like factories, manufacturing, or, maybe even, type of union work, like with the railroad construction or the oil and gas industry, they hired in doctors. They brought in benefits, right? Doctors, dentists to help take care of their people. Because what they realized was that their workers were some of their keys to success, right? The number one key for that business was that employee and the trade in which they were bringing into that business. And you never seen anything like it before, right? Everybody was decentralized and pretty much an apprenticeship type program doing their own trade. And as these businesses built out, they realized if I can increase the quality of life for my employee, my business also thrives. And, fast forward us to the late 1900s and early 2000s, you really look back at a business and, we all believe that it's a standard for my provider to provide good healthcare benefits. Right. And I think it's an interesting topic. If you look back and you consider yourself as an employee, why is that a thing I would expect my provider to provide? My healthcare, right? Why is that? I don't expect him to feed me every day for all of my meals. I don't expect him to house me, but I do expect him to provide for my healthcare. Well, from the employer mindset, it's because healthy employees help drive a great business, right? So if you take those concepts, I think that popped up to kind of these old time fashion values when businesses got started, it's all about providing for the overall health of the employee. That can be their wellness, that can be their physical health, that can be their mental health, that can be in good standards of shelter, aka where they work all day. What does their business look like? That can be in terms of how you care for them, all around approach. And I'm only really bringing this up because I think it's kind of interesting on the national dialogue. It kind of seems like we're in an employee versus employer conversation nowadays, where employers just hate their employees and they're just stripping them from everything they can get. And employees feel neglected and taken advantage of. But really the whole symbiotic relationship is it's good for both, right? For to have really healthy employees that love where they work, to have the employer providing those sort of things, that culture and that environment. It's not just profits first. And so I say this kind of, this is our family legacy over the last 65 years as being a third generation business, where you really see that approach to old time values that says, hey, I'm an employer. I'm going to take care of people. I want to make sure this is a great place for them to work. I'm hopefully hiring more members of their family as they've stayed with me longer. And we're providing for the whole ecosystem of the employee. And so I think that's really where it comes from, is that background.
So third generation business, the statistics are not really great on that, right? How
Real bad.
yeah, how they're not supposed, like they typically are the ones that bring the business down. They don't care about it. They sell it. They kind of, sail off into the sunset. But that was not your or your brother's approach when it came to the business. How come? What made you guys want to say, you know what, let's do business right. Let's keep building it. Let's keep adding value to the community.
I think we had a 3% success ratio. I think that's it, right? That 3% of third generation businesses succeed after 5 years, after it's graduated. So we made it past the 5 years. So that's the good news. So I think we beat the 3%. I think a few factors. One, I'm partnered with my brother, who's drastically different than I am. We're complete opposites, which really helps, right? We're a really good balance for the business, having different perspectives and different agendas and priorities where we are able to lean into each other's strengths. I think that helps big time for the health of our business, that we're not overly dominated by maybe a visionary type, or we're not overly dominated by more of a process type person, right? We're able to balance those two. And I think second, I'll bring up our family legacy a lot, but we have a family that's always said we care about our employees. It's not about just us as business owners making money, selling it just to get our quick win, and then everybody else can go figure out what to do from there. For us, it's really been a goal to bring others into the fold. And a fun fact about Documation is that 20% of our business is owned by our shareholders that are not our family. And so we bring our leaders in, we bring our top producers into the company as minority shareholders. So they have stake in the game. What's good for us is good for them. And it changes the ownership mindset of the business, that we're not 100% employee owned, because we want to maintain a certain track record that we have for our business and a certain set of values where we're headed. But we have 20% of our business is owned by our employees to make sure that they feel that they're winning too, and that that's a great relationship.
Thank you for that. There's a lot, and I'm actually going to dig in on a couple of things that you've mentioned. So going back to the family values, right? It's third generation, the generation that spoils a business. You guys are doing great, and it doesn't look like that's going to change. You're taking your kind of grandfathers and parents' values and perpetuating them and amplifying them. I'm curious to know, like, for other third generation businesses that are out there, right? For the grandchildren that are out there. What was it about the situation that you guys decided? Like, what did you connect with? What did your grandfather do right? What did your parents do right that made you want to say, you know what, I want to stick with this and I want to keep going? What do you think was a key there of why you are who you are now?
Well, what's the saying, short sleeves to short sleeves in 30 generations, right? So what you typically have is the entrepreneur that has nothing. They build a business, they make it successful through sheer grit, determination, and luck, right? Obviously they have a good business plan, but they're typical entrepreneurs that just drive it hard. Typically they don't have much and they're growing everything. And then the second generation grows up watching their parents work hard. And as they're watching their parents work hard, they've instilled a work ethic in them. And then that second generation takes over. But by the time the second generation is really running the business, they're usually in a better off socioeconomic standpoint. And so the third generation typically grows up differently, right? They grow up with means, they grow up with wealth. They might have a cleaning person that shows up once a week instead of being the cleaning person. They might have a yard guy that shows up to take care of everything instead of being the yard workers. And I think what you usually see is the third generation loses a standard of work ethic in them. And that's not bad, but it makes it hard, I think, to lead a business if you don't have the same work ethic that all of your other employees have. And for our family, that was very different, right? And my brother and I, you know, and my other two, we have two younger siblings. One of our sister's 14 years younger. So she kind of grew up in a different family when you're that far apart, right? But my brothers and I, we really, after church on Sundays, we were the cleaning crew for the office, right? We were running a fledgling business that was growing and the cleaning crew was just too expensive. So guess what? Family went to church. After church on Sundays, we grabbed some lunch at Schlotsky's and then we went over to the office and we cleaned the office, right? Everybody had a job. One of us swept the warehouse, cleaned the warehouse. The other one cleaned all the toilets and the desks and dusted. And then we took out the trash and we carried it off to a dumpster. We had our really ugly old minivan that we had trash in and we had all the windows rolled down because it smelled horrible. That was just the life we grew up in, right? Holding trash out the window, trying to get it out to the dumpster because it smelled too bad. And that's just what you did on the weekends, right? We didn't really know any different. I didn't know any different that I worked in the warehouse during the summers, or I worked as a delivery driver in college, high school, and I was an intern in high school and college. There's just kind of, for lack of a better term, it was the family culture, right? We were entrepreneurs that ran a business and the whole family worked at the business to help with the overall success of the business and the family. And that was just our experience as a third generation, right?
Interesting, because you had the second generation experience before you had the third generation experience.
Correct.
And it kind of instilled those values and that work ethic and that mindset.
Correct. And I think that's where it's really important for my brother and I and our children, being the fourth generation, that we have to keep re-pushing that work ethic down through them, even though we are better off today at our age than our parents were. And so we have more means, but how do we that's going to be a major struggle for us, to be honest, because we've got to make sure that we're still wanting to do all the hard things that we were taught. And we have to do those hard things to make sure our kids, we're modeling by example, and our kids are doing that with us. So they also instill that same work ethic through them and through their children. Right.
Okay. So now I have to ask, how are you going to do it? How are you going to do it?
You model by example, right? You model by example. You make sure your kids know how to do things with their own hands and they don't rely on somebody else. I don't think there's any good way other than just do it yourself, right? And I think that value plays out into your business too, right? As a CEO of a company, you should never ask an employee to do something you're not willing to do yourself. And we had some issues about 2 years ago with some of our deliveries not going well. So I just call up our guys and say, cool, I'm running delivery tomorrow, right? So I just, threw on my polo and some shorts and drove with our delivery driver all day to see what some of the challenges were with them out in the field in front of our customers. And I think that's really where, values come into play for a business. Every business has values, right? Everyone has, and it just depends. Are you all aligned on the same page that our company, everybody's willing to do something they would have, any manager in our company who should be willing to do something they're going to ask of their own employee. They're not better than them. They're just in a different role in the company,
That I'll double down on that one. I'll probably make a clip out of that last statement, right?
Okay.
So there's another conversation there that I think is a powerful one. I work with a lot of husband and wife teams, and the conversation is always who's in charge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And very rarely does it work out to have co-CEO, co-president framework. You've mentioned that you guys are very different. You guys both know your strengths and weaknesses. You've done a lot of learning and research about it. So it's not just we think we're different. We know how we're different. And I'll let you explain a little bit about some of the work that you've done to be able to define that well. And then what are some of the principles that enable you guys to work as co-CEOs, co-presidents?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And I think on the national stage, I see about 3 or 4 publicly traded companies that have the co-CEOs. I'm going to blank on their names, but I read an interesting article on that. It's hard to be successful, but I think if you can execute on it, actually the returns in the business run better than having one singular CEO, because of now you're adopting the strengths of 2 people, not just one. But it requires really, really strict rules, in our opinion, right? One, we're brothers and we're 14 months apart. So we're almost Irish twins. So God bless our mother. Don't know how she dealt with us, but being that close in age, right? You've got to make sure that there's some clear boundaries. So the first and foremost, the first one that we started day one was we have the same title as co-presidents, co-CEO, to make sure nobody ever gets confused that they can run to him or to run to me and get a different answer, right? Or that one or the other is going to override the other. That was the first one. The second one is we make the exact same amount of money, no matter what. inside this business. Outside the business, if you invest in other things or have, side gig or whatever, that's your thing. But inside the business, we get paid identically. We never wanted a situation in which one of us thought we were working harder than the other and receiving a difference for that. And so we've maintained that identical approach just to make sure that that never gets off balance. And so pretty much whatever you were going to pay us, we just split it in half and say, okay, we're just splitting constantly 50-50. Number three, believe strongly in, and we deal with this with our leadership team as well. We believe in direct one-on-one accountability with somebody that reports to us. And I will never go around anybody else other than my direct reports and direct them. So I believe in inspecting, but I don't believe in directing. So if Hunter has direct reports, I'll never direct his direct reports. If I have mine, Hunter won't direct them. We will inspect, we will have conversations, but I'll never tell them, here's what you need to go do in your job and how to do it, because they're Hunter's direct reports. And I don't want to be sending them mixed messages as to those two differences. And then, the other big one really is we follow the EOS model to some extent on, if you're familiar with EOS, there's always a visionary that leads the strategic vision of the company. And then there's an integrator that helps bring that together. Hunter runs off the visionary role primarily. We're kind of split on that actually on both of us. He's a stronger visionary than I am, much more of an ideas, and I'm much more of an integrator than he is, but we both have some skills in each other's area as well. And so Hunter runs off visionary, I run off integrator, which actually kind of means, and he said this in the past, so I'll quote him on this. He said that if push comes to shove on something that needs to get done to run the business, he actually defers to me because I know how to integrate it better than he does because I understand all the moving pieces and parts. But typically, if push comes to shove on something that has to do with the strategic vision of the company, I will defer to Hunter because I think he has a better knack for where we need the feeling of where we need to be headed versus than I do. And so we will defer to one another in certain situations, depending on if we think it matches the strategy of the company or the tactical approach for the company.
Wow, that's a very solid framework.
Yeah.
So what would be your advice for like, let's say a husband and wife team where, the difference that I see in a husband and wife team is that they might share some values, but they might also have different ones, right? You guys were kind of brought up in the same household, saw the same things, have some of the same beliefs, the same values, the same philosophy. And you can always kind of use that to center yourselves right around decision making or taking action. What do you think someone that, again, it's a husband and wife team, so they come from slightly different backgrounds, even though they might still share some values. What do you think they can do to be able to, as you said, have these strict rules, clear boundary, no override?
I think that's a harder one than brothers, to be honest, husband and wife, because it never, at least I go home to my own bed in my own home at the end of each day. We need a little bit of break from one another. We're not perfect. We're brothers. We get about a tiff about once a year. It's about once a year we get on each other's nerves and we try to hide it as much as possible from our leadership team and resolve it. Right. But you're going to do that.
A good one.
You're going to do that anyways with your own brother, right? Husband and wife team. I think, with Hunter and I, a good marriage, there's no one person that's in charge, right? A good marriage has differing levels of power moving between the husband and wife at different points in time based on the strengths and their roles in the family, regardless of what those are, right? And everybody has an idea. I think a strong marriage says, I don't have to be strong all the time. My wife can be strong today. And then I'm strong later today because I can provide better value to the family in that way. And that's really how our brother and I work that. And I think that's how the business should follow as well for a husband and wife team. The husband doesn't always have to be strong. If the wife's a better visionary, I think she should be the visionary, or the man or the husband should be the visionary. I think they just need to stay in their lane. Right. And I think it'd be better in those situations for one to say, hey, listen, I'm the strategy person. You're the tactical, but you really got to stay out of their lane. If you've agreed on those things, like if you step back and said, hey, listen, you know how to run this business better than I do. Your goal is to then just be the preacher, the evangelist, the strategy person, maybe, vendor relationships, and be out there in the field all day telling people the story, right? You got to get out of the other person's way who knows how to run the business, because I think that's a failure of top level leaders, is they think they can run the entire business and they need to realize they just need better team members to run it for them, right? And that's usually the visionaries, right? The visionaries usually struggle with letting go on running the business, versus the integrators tend to want to run the business, but they don't want to preach the business, right? And they tend to be easier to just let go of that portion of it.
So there's a lot there. You need the right partners, you need the right team members, you
Right.
need to have complementary people to you that causes some pains, right? Because you're gonna see things differently and have different tendencies, but there's value because it brings balance as well. But I'll stick to this one, right? Like stay in your lane. Know
Same.
your lane, stay in your lane. So we were talking about strength finders, and that is definitely one way that you can identify your own strengths and what your lane should be. Have you used any other tools? Strength finder being a really solid one, but I'm curious if you've used other tools.
Yeah, as a company, we've never done strength finders. That's not a bad one to utilize. I really like that one because it just gives you some simple words. The only problem with that one, there's almost too many words to know
Mhm.
everybody's strengths. You can put them on their desk, but then you're making sure everybody knows all 56 words, what they mean and, what they
Yeah.
mean, right? And some of those. So I think that's a good one. Obviously, a disc assessment is perfect because it's simple. You've
Mhm.
got 4 behavioral types. We, as an employer, every employee before they're hired as part of our interview process has to run through a behavioral analysis that we use. So it's not personality. It's not a test. It's just a behavioral assessment that has portions of the DISC analysis in it. So you've got your DISC, the DISC. We also look at cognitive traits and achievement traits, like whether or not you're more analytical or creative or cognitive when you're solving problems, what's your levels of energy and optimism, kind of your behavioral energy side of the business. Every one of us has a profile, and we actually teach and train our managers how to review people's profile when you're looking at interviewing them to make sure they're the right person on the right seat on the bus. Right. So we utilize that as well. We've looked at 5 voices. I don't know if you've looked through the 5 voices out of the UK. I've looked at that one because it's a very simple approach as well. Ultimately, we didn't adopt it. It just wasn't for us. But I really like more maybe of the longer term tried and true methods like the DISC that have stood the test of time in our, the last 5, 10 years kind of ad that have popped up with good marketing.
So I'm not sure if you're using one of these, but for our audience, Shadow Match does what Preston's talking about. You've got Culture Index, Predictive Index,
Predictably.
eh, and these are all really good tools to get exactly what we're talking about here right now. One of the tools that I really like is Pat Lencioni's 6 Types of Working Genius. I don't know if
Mhm.
you've had a chance to look at that one, but it really helps consolidate kind of like behavioral with profile personality in a simple six step. I think we've talked about this in other podcasts as well. So know yourself, know your team, understand what your lane should be, stay within it, and make sure you have clear boundaries of what you've got to stay in, and then know when and what you have to be deferring, right?
Right. Yeah.
So let's kind of address leadership like straight on, right? Where, when, how did you learn about like the concept of leadership, or that, you were gonna have to be a leader? Was it something natural and organic, or was it something, like that was explicitly discussed?
Yeah. The big question is the nature versus nurture, right? Are leaders born or are they made? This one's been debated for a few thousand years now, right? This is just natural to humanity. I think, you know, I'm going to land on somewhere in the middle that says most leaders that I've seen in the past are always just naturally curious humans that like to ask a lot of questions. And it usually starts with why. Why is it this way? Why? They're just embarking on a path. I think for me, I was a very curious kid. And as somewhat a middle child of 4, much to my parents' chagrin, I was way too curious and kind of bucking them on the why question on everything. I wanted to just understand the reasoning behind everything. I do remember probably the first leadership thing I went through was here in San Antonio in high school, the Rotary Youth Leader Program. They still run it actually through Rotary out at T-Bar-M camps every Martin Luther King weekend. It's called RYLA, RYLA. That was probably the first real leadership program I've been through that I was nominated as 2 members of my high school class to go to, and really just loved all of the concepts and thoughts they were teaching of, even just small drills like, hey, come, you as a group need to build this, and just kind of watching how you utilize the strengths of others in the team rather than you having to realize that you're not the smartest one in the group. Right. and that even though you are competent, you've got to rely on others to help get it done. I think it started there. And then I think after that, for me, I joined other groups. Like in college, I joined one that we met weekly to talk about leadership development and leadership skills and bringing in speakers. And ultimately, I think the same trend falls in everything, that none of us did this on our own. Every single one of us had mentors or speakers or somebody older than us reinvesting in us, teaching, training, coaching, helping, mentoring. And and I think ultimately for a good leader, they were more willing to listen to that help and that coaching than others were. And I think that's really one of those keys. They wanted to listen. They were like a sponge. And I think now that I'm getting older, when I look back at some younger people I'm talking to, I can tell those that are really, really just like a sponge. They just want to absorb everything they can learn from somebody either higher up in their role or just older than them with more wisdom and experience. And then there's a lot of, I'd say the larger group doesn't really care. And I think that's really, if you get back to nature versus nurture, were they made or were they born? I think it's right there in between, right? It's someone saying, I'm naturally curious. I really want to absorb all this information. I really want to improve myself, but they have to be, there's a lot of people like that, but they have to be willing to go out, actively hunt it down and tell people, I'm interested. I'm interested. I'm interested. I want to learn. And then, for our kids that aren't in situations, we've got to make sure we as a society are putting them in really good environments that helps them naturally foster and grow that too. Right. Because we don't want our kids being a victim of their own circumstances. And we've got to find a way to help mentor them through that and grow them up in leadership.
Excellent. I love what you're saying. So, leaders are curious. They want to learn. They want to grow. They ultimately recognize that you're going to need to work with other people to accomplish great things,
Mhm.
and are not afraid of that. And there's this thing you're talking about where you can feel confident of your capabilities, or recognize that you don't have to do it all by yourself.
Correct.
Right. To me, one of the big awakenings of leadership is when someone realizes that they don't have to be the smartest person in the room. Right. Where in fact, if you aren't the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Correct.
So you kind of realize that early on through these different programs.
And I'd say, and if you don't mind me adding there, Max, I'd say that's
Please.
the hardest thing of somebody being young. I'm only 34 years old. I'm extremely young for our industry as well as for also being an owner and a leader of a business. I think the hardest thing is being young, you're trying to learn what to do and how to do, right? So you're asking the questions why, and it's a lot of trial and error, but you're really just learning what and how. And the problem is, how do you reinvest in a leadership team when you can't point them in the right direction? Because you really have no clue, because you don't have the experience, right? Your age is working against you because you haven't had enough time. And I think that's one of the joys of getting older and having more years and experience and wisdom behind you. It's easier to sit back and say, I understand how to guide somebody in a situation. So now I can spend more time pouring into them to develop them and trust them, because I know at least, we talk about our business being a highway, right? Like I want to throw up barriers on this highway. And as long as my leaders stay within these barriers, they can bounce around all day long. Just don't get out of the highway, right? I don't need you exiting off into a different direction. But if you're too young and you don't have the experience, how do you even know what the barriers are? Right? How do you even know how to set those up with your team? So how you're spending all of your time trying to figure it out. So then you know how to mentor and lead people in the right
Well,
direction. You know,
that's a great conversation. That's a great conversation because there's even some duality here, right? Because you're saying, you want to model leadership, and you want to have the experience so you can help guide people and teach them and keep them within the boundaries. But at the same time, you've been in this position being younger than a lot of the people that I'm sure work for the organization. And maybe they've been along this path longer than you, but then again, you had to be the leader for them. And part of your mind saying, well, I have to travel the road before I can teach the road. But then on the other hand, you're in a situation where you haven't traveled them. How did you do it?
the only answer there is fail fast forward, right? So how fast can I fail at this? And can I lean forward when I fail? Right. And I think a really good example would be one of our CFOs that have been with us for a good 16 years with our first and second generation family. I'm not an accountant by trade. I've never been a CFO. Right. I don't know what we're talking about when we get into subledgers on a balance sheet and general ledger entries, right? I am not have any background in that. And so how do I sit down and discuss these conversations and understand the nuts and bolts of your job so we can even be on the same playing field? But then also, how do I make sure that that works with the sales leaders or the operational leaders or the service leaders to make sure that what we're doing in good governance with financial control is also impacting them in the right way. Right. And I would say I didn't do a good job. That's probably one of them that I failed fast by just absorbing as much as I can and just getting into as many details as I can to understand that role and that person's objectives and their experience, which they brought a ton of experience to our company and our team and had done a wonderful job. But ultimately, we couldn't truly be on the same page because I didn't have the experience to guide this individual and help them where they wanted to go in their future. Obviously, I'm way too young, right? I'm the same age as their child, right? And so those are hard relationships. There's no right answer, right? There's no right answer for me, and there's no right answer for the CFO that we had. And so I ultimately land on at this point in time, it's failed fast and failed forward, right? So learn from those mistakes, learn from the ability, what you don't know, right? And the older we get, the more that I know, the more I realize what I don't know. And how do you then take that and then use that to help develop your current team and empower them, but also make sure that I have clear boundaries around where they're allowed to stray. And if you want to stray, then why don't we sit down and talk about why you're going to go shift our vision in a different direction for your division, your department, or your branch.
I think this is fascinating because, I believe that every value has a good thing and has some watch outs. So when you're saying, again, going back to the leading by example and modeling, I think you're the type of person that really likes to know what's going on, right? And really understand it. And you've probably had to learn how to trust people, trust that you've got the right person with the right knowledge and the right skill, because you can't be everywhere all the time. And I think that if I understand correctly, part of that failing is to say, look, I might not know what needs to be known, but if I have the right person, they will. And if I trust them, we're going to be able to get the outcomes that we want. And it's kind of the same belief that makes you so strong in some places might be a blind spot in another. And kind of working the process and recognizing that and saying, oh, this is how I have to change my behavior to do a better job as the leader and ultimately get the outcomes for the organization.
And that's one of my top weaknesses. That's one of the hardest things to do is to continue to delegate, right? But inspect, right? And that is one of the hardest things to do, right? Because ultimately it's hard to point somebody in the right direction if you don't know what they do all day. So you need that experience and the understanding of their job and their teams to understand those nuances and bringing yourself back to jump in and help fix it. Because, I don't know who says this quote, but, ultimately, you as a leader can typically fix something and solve a problem faster than someone else, but it requires you about 5 times as much time to go and invest and develop your people to solve it perpetually for the future.
Mm.
I can do it so much faster. So I want to shift to that faster approach, but ultimately I'm shortchanging the entire company and my team's development by not doing that. And there's one of me and, we view our company like a highway. If I'm a single lane highway, every issue is now bottlenecking down to me. I would much rather have a 13-member leadership team and we're a 13-lane highway and every issue is running up and down those lanes so they can get resolved faster, because I think that's the death of the company. I think you said earlier when we were chatting offline that most companies, start from indigestion, right? Not digestion. And man, companies just drown out and starve to death when single individuals at the top start grabbing all those issues and funneling them through them, because the whole company is now waiting on them. All of your growth, all of your performance, all of your improvement, all of your profits are flowing through these few individuals. And you asked about some things that I look at. One article we reread every single year was published by the Harvard Business Review back in the 60s called Who's Got the Monkeys? I don't know if you've ever read that article about getting the monkey off your back, and I'll send it to you after this, Max, because it's my favorite article that I resend to our management team every year. And I probably reread it every 6 months. And I've probably printed it off every 3 months in a meeting with a manager dealing with this issue. And the concept is that, if you read the article, that a manager has been working their butt off all week and they have no time possible And it's Friday afternoon. And as they're running out the door, they have their 5 direct reports standing out there saying, I need an answer on X, Y, Z, A, B, C. And he says, don't worry about it. I'll come in tomorrow and I'll go ahead and send you all the answers I have so you can keep moving forward. Right. And on Saturday, he leaves the family. He's driving into the office, and on his way in the office, he sees his 4 direct reports all out on the golf course, having the best time of their life, laughing, smiling, hanging out. He's headed in the office to go work on what he calls monkeys, right? And the goal here is that all of the direct reports have tossed up all the issues and monkeys onto his back to resolve for him. And he realizes on his way in, I'm doing everything wrong as a manager. I am making everybody's problem my own, and I'm ultimately slowing them all down to accomplishing their job because they're all waiting on me, and I'm aggregating everybody's issues. How do I turn around and take those monkeys, toss them back to those employees so they can be empowered, which is really what we're talking about here. It's delegation empowerment. How can I empower them to go take that with their knowledge, with their understanding of the issue, because they're so much closer to it than I am. I'm not dealing with it all day. And how can I just be more of a coach to help them understand how to solve that issue rather than waiting on me, so I can free up the whole company to go run, not wait on me to make all those answers. And so kind of a little diatribe there on that, but that's one of my favorite articles I've ever read.
Thank you. Thank you. So a quick reminder for our audience, head over to practicalleadership.com, where you can download the summary, keynotes, and the monkeys, get the monkeys off my back.
I'll send it to you.
Yes. So we'll have it there for you guys so you can download it and read it and know exactly what Preston is talking about. So, right, because I see this all the time, kind of like the stage where the business leader built the business on their back with their hard work, with their grit, with their determination. And they can do just about anything better and faster than anyone else. And they've got to get comfortable with somebody else doing the job slower and not as well as they can at first. But if they don't, then the organization doesn't grow, right? And you gave us a quote. There's one similar that I remember, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Yeah. And they kind of go hand in hand with those. So learn how to make sure that your team is tackling the challenges and being able to coach them and teach them so you could develop them, which takes us to another conversation, which is you've got to have the right people for that, right? Because if you have people that are waiting for your answers and can't solve the challenges or issues in front of them, you're not going to go very far. You're going to get frustrated and then you're going to revert back to your old habits. So how do you make sure you have the right people, and how do you coach them and train them and teach them how to, manage these, the monkeys, right?
Manage the monkeys. You're so right. And this is probably one of my favorite topics to talk about, is how do you recruit and hire the right people? Once you've hired them, how do you train them? Because we got to train them. And then once you train them, how do I continuously manage, motivate, delegate, and empower, right? That's the basics of management, right? Those are the keys of your job. Ultimately, when you get to the high level management role, I think for what you're looking at, how do you get the right people in the right job with the right relationship? That's what we say consistently in our business. I'm after the right people. I want to put them in the right job, and I want to have the right relationship with them. And if I don't have all three, it fails. We know constantly you hire the right person and I get them into the right position. We call it, the right seat on the bus, right? We've heard that before. But if I don't have the right relationship, everything crumbles, right? If they don't respect my experience, if they don't respect my authority, if I just don't have the right rapport, or we don't communicate on the right ways, or they don't think I care about them, right? There's all different ways we as managers and leaders fail, and the employee fails if they're not open to any of that, right? Where you still have the right relationship, it'll never work out. We also see ways in which you have a wonderful relationship with one of your direct reports and they're the right person, but they're absolutely in the right job, in the wrong job. What do? I got to get you on a different seat on the bus, right? Because I need to utilize your behaviors, your skills and experience in a better position for you in the company. And then ultimately, sometimes we land on the worst of it all, which is I just have the wrong person. And no one person's the wrong person in the world. They're just not the right person for your business. You don't have the same values. You don't have the same objectives. You don't have the same goals. Let's go work with that person to have a sit down conversation about how do you get to another company that's a better fit for you. And we're going to help support you in that. And it's no hard feelings, get off to that other company where you're going to thrive. And so we actually run a very strategic management development program at Documation. that my brother and I actually developed over 5 years ago. We follow some really old timey methods. So you're going to hear us say this old fashioned stuff, right? But we're pulling from the IBM training modules back from, the 60s as they trained their employees. If I can look at some of the greatest companies that ever existed, they're not these companies that boom and bust nowadays over a 10-year period. They're companies that survive for hundreds of years, right? And they usually have some tried and true methodologies. And one of those is from IBM. And it's this training method. How do I recruit and hire people? Once I've got them, how do I train them? And then how do I manage and develop? And my brother and I teach a whole day seminar to our management group, anybody at the manager level and above. They all go through it every third year, and we teach one a quarter. So yesterday, actually, we spoke on and taught how to recruit and hire to our management team. And Q2, we'll teach how to train somebody once you've hired them for an entire day. And then in Q3, we will teach how to manage and develop. And then in Q4, we actually teach a seminar on our service standards. We're a service driven business. And so we actually make all of our employees every 3 years go through this seminar on our exceptional standards for quality service. And my brother and I believe that there's some key roles that we have to fulfill. And one of those is we have to teach our people. And that's specifically our direct reports and our managers. We don't use outsiders. We don't use consultants. We teach them because they need to do it the documentation way. And we have some very specific standards. Below that, they need to go teach their people and train their people. So we actually run the whole curriculum. We teach for about 8 hours. It's very conversational. It's very group work. And we walk through these methodologies. They walk away with their management development program binder. And that's one of our favorite ones because we're teaching our people how do we recruit people with the right core values that documentation follows. And then how do you actually hire them to make sure they fit those core values? Because if we hire the right people with the right values, they're going to go execute on everything else. I can teach them how to do the job. What I can't teach them is their values, right? That's just who they are. So that's what we're really after when we're recruiting.
I really appreciate that insight because fundamentals rarely change, right? The fundamentals rarely change. What you put on top of it can evolve and can change. I see it in marketing. I see it in strategy. I see it in people where there's always a hype on the latest and greatest. But ultimately, if it doesn't have the right fundamentals in place, it ends up not working. And if it has the right fundamentals in place, then you can call it and color it whatever way you want, and you're recognizing that and you're sticking to it. The other thing for everyone out there to recognize is the priority you're putting on working with your management team and developing your management team. And it's not just saying that it's the most important thing; it's demonstrating it by the amount of time and energy you invest in them. And not saying it would be a nice to have or it'd be good if I could do this. You're spending entire days doing this at a time where you've got a bunch of different things pulling at you from every direction. And you're still making the right time. You're still making the time to invest your energy on the right things and prioritizing that well, which is a great example of, you want to make your culture come to life, put the time behind it, right? Put your energy behind it. And if you don't, then who will?
Correct.
And ultimately, we know how important culture is to scale. And you're sharing with us how, look, if we don't teach our managers directly, right, that the documentation way, then it's going to be diluted as it moves through the ranks. So you're trying to consistently keep it pure at the high level, and not saying it's a one and done, right? I see this a lot. Oh no, we had that meeting 3 years ago. It's like, well, when was the last time you discussed your values and made them come to life? So you're saying we are consistently repeating this training, and it's alive consistently in everything that we do, right? In every quarter it's there.
Do you know who learns the most from those trainings? My brother and I. We do. Every time we teach it, we remind ourselves how much we failed in the last 12 months on executing on what we're teaching, right? Because we're humans, we're not perfect. We have the best intent, but we have habits that work against us, right? And every time we teach it, we walk away. And while we're actively teaching it, we're saying, man, here's a situation in which I could have done this better, right? Because I learned the most because, if you really want to learn a topic, go and teach it, right? And we absolutely love it because we teach it every 12 months, the same class now for years. And I forget things. And our people have to go through this like clockwork every 3 years because we're just, whatever makes us successful, we tend to migrate away from that, right? And so if I was doing something really successful recruiting, successful people migrate away from things that made them successful. So we got to re-steer ourselves back on track and make sure I get back to what I was doing. And it's probably one of my favorite days of the year. But my wife knows when I get home, that is those 4 days of the year, I'm drained. I don't want to speak. I've been speaking 8 hours straight and I am done. Right. She always knows. I always warn her, hey, I've got one of those. And she, oh, okay. Hey, I'll put the kids to bed tonight. Just give me, my brain's just got to refresh. It's
Yeah.
actually exhausting.
I bet. So first thing, right? Awareness. You're acknowledging your awareness of what you're good at, what you're not so good at, what you need to do better. And that's to me one of those traits of leadership, just being self-aware. And I have don't necessarily love the idea of where we're failing, but rather where we need to do better.
Yep. Yep.
But recognizing that and being able to put the ego to the side and saying, hey, we're not perfect. We're not doing this great. We're teaching this, and yet sometimes we fall short. And I think a lot of leaders have a hard time looking at themselves in the mirror and recognizing that. And and sometimes it comes associated with a lot of fear, right? Like if I'm failing and I'm the leader, it hurts your ego and it kind of sends you in the wrong path. And you and your brother are approaching it with openness and saying it's not a bad thing, it's the reality. How do we make it better?
Mhm.
And not hiding it, right? And
Exactly.
and having it in front. Then revisiting it consistently, that really helps it to strengthen it. And one quick thing that I will add, I really believe in a one-page strategic plan, right? There's different variations of it it has evolved over the years, but ultimately having a printed copy that you have with you at all times, recognizing you of of your strategy, your direction, your values, what you're trying to accomplish, is a really solid habit, which helps us just continue to program our brain, right? Because we're looking at that every day, every day, every day, and it reminds us. So it actually helps us stay the course a little bit better. So thank you for saying we've got to teach that, we've got to recognize it, and we've got to continue to evolve on this. There's so many more questions that I have. We're starting to get a little bit short on time. So I kind of want to ask you this. What are some things that I haven't asked you about? What has made you a great leader regarding your mindset, or some of the tools that you use that you think our audience needs to know about or needs to use? Do you have like a go-to system tool approach? You've already given us a great read. Anything else?
I'll be honest. I don't think I have any, there's no silver bullet there. I think for anybody that I know that's a much better leader than I am, every single one of them has that same similar trait of a relentless learner. They just love to learn, right? They like to listen. They like to absorb. They like to gather information from different sources. They love to listen to speakers. They love to take notes, right? For me, it's just, news articles. I receive 5 to 7 different types of news reports each day, right? And it's highlights. We don't have time to go through everything, but I'm just keeping abreast with what's going on in my city, at the state level, at the federal level, maybe at the national level, and what's going on around the world, right? What's happening today in Turkey, right? And that's one part of it, just being aware of the world our people are living in, right? What's affecting them and how we're going through it. I think the other is in your industry. I receive about 3 different outlets on our industry, either weekly or monthly, telling me what's going on in my industry, what's new, what's changing, who are the thought leaders, what are some of their blogs, videos, podcasts. And then you have the slew of what I would call professional self-help or professional development. And there's just endless. I mean, I love
Mm,
Barnes and Noble. It's one of my favorite stores to go to. I get all excited just looking at books. And walking in, it's just, I can read all day long, every single day, and never have time to get through all the material that's been published. But I do know that leaders are relentless learners. So my favorite leaders here in town that I've spent a lot of time with is like Judge Nelson Wolf, who not only writes, he also reads constantly, right? I bet Judge Wolf works through about 8 to 12 books. And Cheryl Scullery, our former city manager, is one of the most impressive leaders I've ever seen before. Cheryl was always known for reading. I think it's like 12 to 16 books a month, right? Just a relentless learner. And so for me, one of my things is I read about an hour every night before I go to bed. That's just kind of my most enjoyable time to read. And it just kind of depends. Sometimes it's nonfiction, sometimes it's fiction. Sometimes my mind needs a break, so I'm going to read that. Sometimes it's professional development. I think just that focus on I'm absorbing information. If there's a seminar my industry's hosting or somebody, I'm going to go join in on that to just hear and absorb what I can. But I'm not going to take it all, right? I'm going to take tidbits that's the most important for me, my business, my family, and my personal life. and hopefully go execute and form a new habit off of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So leaders are readers. So
Leaders and readers.
we always say that, right? You've got to be putting new ideas in your mind, letting them combine into great new, better ideas as well. Thank you for sharing that. I promised the audience we were going to talk for a second about community house. I think it's one of the best kept secrets in town. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently the chair of the Texas Research and Technology Foundation. There's a lot going on there. I'll call it TRTF just to save us some words. TRTF is the acronym. There's a lot going on there. We run Velocity Texas, which is our economic incubator. We have Alamo Angels underneath us, which is our angel investor program. We have Texas Research Park out west of San Antonio. We have the Merchants Ice and the Innovation District on the near east side of San Antonio as we're developing out all those areas as well for research and biosciences. And then we also have Community House. And this one's really exciting, something cool to talk about. Community House was formed 3 years ago by TRTF. And the goal of Community House is we've seen too many businesses exit here in San Antonio to outside money. And whatever that means, it's, it's selling off to Walmart and all their profits to go back to Arkansas, right? It's selling off to private equity and being traded around out there in New Jersey. It's going to a larger regional conglomerate. Ultimately, there's a lot of business owners that want to exit their business, but want to keep their employees the same. They want to keep their legacy the same, but they don't have a family member to perpetuate down to. Now, they might have family in the business, but they're not the right people to take over and are going to ruin the business. And that's okay, right? The best thing you can do for your people is put competent leaders in place and make sure that they're going to keep running your business, hopefully with the same values and direction you've had. And so Community House is an offering now in which you have the ability to sell to Community House, which is owned as a nonprofit. So all of its tax-free income for any of the profits owned by Community House. So we're not paying taxes on that. And they will own your business and keep it here, local, keep the team in place. There's literally no transition except for the owner, the ability to exit. But as an owner, you're probably going to want to exit over 6 months, a year, 2 years. This isn't a one and done how PE is going to run it, where you're going to come on in, they're going to strip the whole company, typically readjust everything for somebody else's earnings and kind of rework your company, right? This is a good long-term strategy plan. And so if you're listening to me today and you're interested in something like that, we've got a great offering. Currently today, we own Allen & Allen Lumber Company, long-term company here in San Antonio, providing lumber to our custom home builders and semi-custom home builders, as well as hardware, windows, the full gamut. They own Allen & Allen Lumber Company, is our first Community House company. And right now I can't announce the name yet, but we are finishing off another acquisition right now for another local great provider in the manufacturing space. And so it's just a really unique idea. I applaud Brady Herod, the CEO of TRTF, for coming up with this idea. I also applaud Larry Mills, who has been the right hand of Holtcat and the Spurs for many, many years with the family, who generated this idea together and made it happen as a really, really wonderful, sustainable vehicle. I mean, think about this. You're taking for-profit businesses owned by a nonprofit to create sustainable money forever to funnel the mission, the vision, the values, and the sustainability of this nonprofit to help the betterment of San Antonio. What a great idea, right?
It gives me goosebumps, right? To know that our community now has that option available to them. Where can they go to find out more about this?
If you go to Texas Research Technology Foundation website, you'll see a big old pop-up for Community House. We've got some great, actually about a month ago, great new marketing material, some videos, kind of some vision videos showing how it started, where it's come, some videos about Allen & Allen. So you can hear from an owner how he exited and how it's worked since then. And Allen & Allen has grown, I think, by a good 35% over that 3-year period as well. In seeing them grow and increase their employee headcount for the betterment of the city. I mean, it's really just a really, really neat and fantastic approach.
So the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding takes straight, right?
Correct.
So
Yeah.
we're seeing the outcomes here. I know you've got to run to another meeting here soon. So just to kind of wrap up for today, what is something fun, exciting, cool that you're looking forward to that's going to be happening here in the next few weeks or months?
Next few weeks or months. Oh goodness. A fun one. I'm not a big golf watcher or golfer. I don't do well with hitting those little small balls on the golf course, which most people don't. I much rather enjoy tennis or pickleball where I can get some energy out and go smack it, right? But one of our major partners with our business invited my brother and I to the Masters.
Wow.
And I'm not a golf guy. I am beyond excited to go see the Masters. That is going to be a blast. They're flying us there. They got a house for the 4 of us to all stay in. and I get to do the full blown master's experience because that is one of the hardest things to get into. And so I'm excited. I'll be watching golf like everybody else. My mother-in-law asked me, she does not watch golf at all. She asked me if I get to wear a green jacket while I'm there. And I said, no. I said, I know enough to know those are for the players that actually win the Masters. You don't wear a green jacket. So she started laughing. My father-in-law laughed at her because she didn't know.
Preston, thank you so much for joining us today. I wish we had another hour. There's so much to learn from you, so much value for our audience to get. But we know you got to go on to your next meeting. But hopefully, we can do this again. Get some more of this insight.
Well, thank you, Max. I appreciate the invite. This was really a joy and enjoyed talking today.
Thank you so much. It's been fantastic.